Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to exchange of press with Mr. Βάλντις Ντομπρόβσκις, who is the Vice President for the Euro and Social Dialogue, also in charge of financial stability, financial services and capital markets of the European Union, and he will hold this exchange on the topic of EU's action to mobilize private capital for green and sustainable projects. I will first pass the floor to Vice President, and then we'll move on to your questions. Vice President, please.
Good afternoon, honorable media representatives. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of One Planet Summit for this occasion to discuss how we actually organize our transition towards low-carbon future, including how we finance this transition, because there is an estimated 180 billion euros annual investment gap, talking about energy investment until 2030, for us to deliver on Paris climate change goals. And obviously this amount of investment is beyond the capacity of public sector only, so it's important that we steer also private finance towards green and sustainable goals. In this context, we had set up a high-level expert group by the European Commission, attracting experts from both industry, academia, and non-governmental sector. And they'll be coming with a final report in January, and following up will be then putting forward an action plan on sustainable finance in March next year. So working on a number of directions. Already as a beginning of next year, the reporting requirements for large listed companies, non-financial reporting requirements, will enter into force. We'll be working on fiduciary or investment duties. We'll be setting up taxonomies for green and sustainable assets, so to define actually what is green and what is sustainable, to avoid greenwashing. Based from there, we can then work towards developing green labels, green bond initiatives. We're also assessing the possibility of having a green supporting factor for bank lending towards green and sustainable goals, similarly as we already now have a SME supporting factor for small and medium enterprises. So it's quite a holistic exercise where we'll need to look at different elements in the investment chain and ensure that also the approach of financial market participants is changing, and we are incentivizing this change growth more towards green and sustainable goals.
Thank you, Vice President Dombrovskis. I will now open the floor to your questions on the panel that Dombrovskis was co-chairing, as well as the topic at hand today. So before posing a question, please let us know who you are and which media you represent. Who wants to go first? Go ahead. Sorry, wait for the mic, please.
Hello, Yannis Paleologos from Kathimerini newspaper in Athens, Greece. Other than trying to promote investment in green assets, is there thought to applying greater pressure or creating counter-incentives for countries that use a lot of brown coal in their energy production, like Greece?
As regards emissions at the country level, as you know, we have agreement on emissions trading scheme, and each member state is facing its targets in terms of investment reduction, and there are also and those are legally binding targets with associated enforcement mechanism. So I'd say that's the main way how we ensure emission reduction at the country level.
Okay, your turn, please.
Good morning, Aline Robert, Euractiv. Could you be a bit more specific on what we can expect in January in this initiative about climate reporting for all? And in which sense climate reporting can be a solution for against climate change? Thanks.
What will happen in January, basically the directive on non-financial disclosures will enter into force, so it's actually covers a broad set of non-financial elements, so it's not only sustainability or climate change, it's more like ESG factors which large listed companies will have to report as of beginning of next year. But of course it's not the end of our work. As I was saying, in January we'll be having also the final report of our high-level expert group, and we'll be following it up with a further action plan in March, and I already outlined the main directions of work for this action plan.
Thank you. Moving on. Colleague there.
Hello, I'm Lalela Christopoulou from Athens newspaper in Athens, Greece. There was a lot of talk in the first panel that we saw about mobilizing pension funds and investment funds in order to invest in green projects. Could you elaborate on how this is going to be achieved?
Yes, so this is certainly one of the work directions, and there are a number of concrete proposals. First, we propose to make sustainability considerations as part of the investment duty or fiduciary duty, so the responsibility of investment funds or asset managers also, for that sake, for the money which they are managing. Second, we already have proposed also to give a mandate for European supervisory authorities, and in this case it's probably the most concerned are EIOPA and ESMA, a mandate of also assessing sustainability considerations in the finance, so basically to put some pressure on the financial sector to move towards green and sustainable business models. But of course, as I was telling, if we want financial sector to invest in green, we need to define what the green really is, and for this we need to develop this EU taxonomy for green and sustainable finance.
Claire, please. Can we have the mic, please? Sorry.
Yes, Claire Stam from the French press agency AEF. My question is regarding the green supporting factor. Did I understand you correctly? The plan or the future plan will integrate this element, or yes, can you be a little bit more specific about the reporting? What kind of criteria will you use? And
first, on this green supporting factor, it's something which we are currently still working on. And first, there are still a couple of stages we need to go through. First, we need to see the final report of our high-level expert group, but this was something which they also had been working on. Second, we will be then following up and preparing our action plan. So that's where this proposal will be elaborated on more detail. Currently, I can only also refer to this initiative in European Parliament, where there is a report also suggesting this idea of having a green supporting factor, or possibly also something which is called brown punishing factor, and something which we voiced that we look positively at this initiative, and in the case it will be something which will also be working and elaborating when preparing our action plan.
Did you have a follow-up? No? No? Okay, Efe.
Ángel Calvo from the Spanish press news agency EFE. Can you give us the detail about how to obtain this 9 billion euro announced this morning by Arias Cañete for the external fund? How to obtain them?
Maybe we should indeed ask the questions to Arias Cañete himself. I'm afraid I'm not aware of all the announcements which have been being made here today, because believe me, there are quite a few, and it's positive that there are many new initiatives, many new announcements.
Do we have further requests for the floor? Go ahead. And then Sarah.
Anne Chivial from Le Figaro. Do you think that we have to change the prudential rules for banking sector to help to accelerate financing for green economy?
When we are discussing green supporting factor, this is exactly what we are currently assessing. Those are prudential rules. Okay. And there are precedents in this regard. We already now have what's called SME supporting factor for bank lending to small and medium enterprises. Of course, by doing so, one also needs to exercise caution, because you cannot completely decouple capital requirements from underlying risks. The very fact that something is green does not automatically mean that it's risk-free. So there is some calibrations which you need to use, how much you can actually adjust capital requirements when discussing this supporting factor. But also, I mentioned this initiative of European Parliament. It's exactly in context of our legislative proposal on capital requirements regulation and directive.
Thank you. Claire, and then Sarah, please.
How far are you in the definition, or the common definition of green finance? What is green for the European market?
Well, this is one of the key questions, and something we'll also be addressing in our action plan for sustainable finance, because indeed, if we want to promote green in different ways, providing transparency for investors, supporting through green supporting factor, or developing some EU green labels, for example, you need to know what is green, and that's why I was telling that one of the work streams will be developing of EU taxonomy on green and sustainable finance and green and sustainable investment, but which is something which is still, I would say, work in progress, and will be part of our action plan in March.
Thank you. Sarah, please.
Thank you. On the lower capital requirements that you mentioned in your speech, first of all, is it that were banks reluctant to invest in green projects, or sort of encourage green things? So you needed lower capital requirements, and is there a risk by doing that do you create risk for safe banks in order to promote green lending?
Once again, on this green supporting factor, it's something which has to be carefully calibrated. And as I was saying, it's not that you can detach capital requirements from risk. It still needs to be risk-based, so there are certain adjustments which you can make. For example, I was referring to the SME supporting factor. SME supporting factor allows to reduce capital requirements for underlying loans, if I'm not mistaken, to up to 23%. So it's a limited adjustment which you can make, and this could be a similar approach also when we look now at this green supporting factor.
Thank you, Vice President. I don't see any further requests for the... There's one. Go ahead.
Jan Bielecki, I'm a journalist for Rzeczpospolita, that's a leading daily in Poland. You know probably that we have like 95% of electricity produced from coal still, and this is still developing their investments and so on. Is it possible to continue like this, or slowly there will be conditions, financial maybe conditions, regulatory conditions in the EU, which will forbid this, and Poland should be aware of such a change in the coming years?
I would say those conditions are already changing. I was already referring to the emission trading scheme and also emission targets, which member states are having, and those are legally binding targets, and member states need to work towards meeting those targets. Of course, it's up to the member states to decide exact strategy, but quite often it involves limiting dependence on coal, which is one of the highest emission source of energy. Also, when, for example, promoting new initiatives like European Fund for Strategic Investment, also in European Structural Investment Funds, there are certain targets on which share of investment should go towards green and sustainable goals. So also when we are proposing some EU support to the member states, we're also trying to steer it towards sustainable goals.
Very good. I hear that there were some requests of One Planet Summit topic, so we have time for one or two. So if you want to post them to the Vice President, you can do it now. Was it you two there nodding? You? Yes, go ahead. Just wait for the... Yes, go ahead. I mean, if you... We have a minute or two. Go ahead.
Yes, hi. So it's Katmerini again. It's a Greece question. I wanted to ask... to what extent you are confident that the quite demanding prior actions that were recently published in my newspaper, especially as relating to the privatizations that have to take place in the following months, will take place given the significant opposition to them in the country? And also whether you are concerned at the growing chorus of pro-government voices in Greece talking about a clean exit in August 2018?
First of all, on prior actions and the program, I would say currently things are broadly speaking on track as regards the third review. We see that Greece is fulfilling and even overachieving its fiscal targets, so it's on track to meet next year's primary surplus target of 3.5% of GDP. We saw strong engagement and very constructive attitude of the Greek government during the discussions as regards the third review. We see the work on prior actions ongoing, so we believe that it's possible to conclude them in due time and have, I would say, a relatively quick conclusion of the third review. On the follow-up questions on exact exit modalities, I would say this is something which we would need to discuss already once we will be finalizing the third review, when we will be seeing that programming is on track, then indeed it will be a high time to start preparing for conclusion of the program next August as planned.
Okay, I think there's one last. Okay, let's take one last from the Greeks.
Follow up on my colleagues' questions, yes, and ask about where do we stand on the negotiations about the debt sustainability of Greece, which is a very important element of how it's going to achieve the objective of exiting the program in August 2018.
Well, as you know, this has been agreed in Eurogroup already a few years ago that indeed those issues will be dealt prior to the program conclusion. So we are approaching this stage, and I could imagine that also following the third review, there will be discussions on debt measures based on the work which has been already indicated by Eurogroup on short, medium and long-term debt measures.
Okay, still in Greece? That's the very, very last.
We haven't heard anything for plans engaging newer generations of European citizens to green programs. Have you calculated how many new working positions are going to create those new financing programs?
On this, of course, it needs to be calculated, I would say, sector by sector, even project by project, but what we see is that there is a potential actually for creation of many new jobs while investing towards more sustainable economy. And we see that there is no contradiction between economic growth and emission reductions. We had seen it over the last 20 years. I was giving this historical example when we saw an average reduction of emissions by 20% in EU, and at the same time we saw the economic increase by 50% of the EU. So we obviously see that we can meet both energy emission goals and still ensure economic growth and job creation.
And as regards, just if I may add, there is actually a panel debate ongoing at the moment where youth and urban area cities are being discussed, and this is one of the points of our action plan is youth, and it's Vice President Maros Šefčovič who's in charge of that, so I would also want to refer you to that because we will have further information available after the panel, which is due to finish in 30 minutes. But ladies and gentlemen, we will close this press conference now. And thank you for coming, and enjoy the rest of the summit. This is the last EU press conference today. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.